Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, September 5th, 2025. The Labor Department says the U.S. added 22,000 jobs in August, lower than expectations. Unemployment rate goes up to 4.3%. President Donald Trump says the real jobs numbers will be next year after his policies have a chance to take effect. Senator Elissa Slotkin, Democrat from Michigan, talks about her vision of keeping the needs of the U.S. middle class front and center in U.S. foreign policy. Heritage Foundation think tank is about to publish a paper recommending government policies reward and promote married heterosexual couples having more children. We'll talk about the implications with Jay Zigmont, CEO of the group Childfree Trust. President Donald Trump signs an executive order renaming the Department of Defense to the Department of War, the name it had from its creation in 1789 until 1949. U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. Jeanine Pirro says two 17-year-old suspects have been arrested in the fatal shooting of a 21-year-old Capitol Hill intern in June, and they'll be tried as adults. New York City Mayor Eric Adams says he is staying in the race for mayor, running for re-election as an independent after reports that the Trump administration was making job offers to him to get him to drop out and boost the chances that the frontrunner, Democratic nominee Zohan Mamdani, would not win. And a major shakeup in the British Labour government. Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner resigned after admitting she failed to pay enough taxes when she bought an apartment. Associated Press writes U.S. employers added just 22,000 jobs last month as the labor market continued to cool due to uncertainty over President Donald Trump's economic policies. Hiring decelerated from 79,000 in July, Labor Department said Friday, and came in below the roughly 80,000 economists had expected for August. The unemployment rate ticked up to 4.3%, also worse than expected and the highest level since 2021. When the Labor Department put out a disappointing jobs report a month ago, an enraged President Donald Trump responded by firing the economist in charge of compiling the numbers and nominating a loyalist to replace her. Talking to reporters Thursday night at a dinner with wealthy tech executives, Trump shrugged off the U.S. jobs data before it landed. That was from Associated Press. Today, the president took a question about the report in the White House Oval Office. He was joined by his National Economic Council Director, Kevin Hassett.
Mr. President, we learned this morning that we've lost 78,000 manufacturing jobs this year. How do you explain it?
Well, one thing we have is, we have the interest rates are too high. That was, a matter of the Fed. But the other thing is so many different elements aren't included yet. And one of the things we've learned, and we learned that the hard way, watching over the last few months, are the corrections that people have been making. They'll say you're losing jobs, and then they'll say, by the way, we have a correction a month later of, 100,000 jobs are missing. They actually had a correction once of 850,000 jobs. But I'll let Kevin just speak about that a little bit, because I heard him speaking about it this morning. I thought he did very well. Please.
Thank you very much, sir. Well, I think that if you look at the indicators, there's capital spending boom, industrial production at an all-time high. The Atlanta Fed says GDP now is north of 3%. And so all the indicators are saying that things are really strong. And what we've also seen is that Goldman Sachs put out a study yesterday that said that the August number tends to be really messed up because of seasonal adjustment things, and they tend to be revised way up. And so I think if they were revised up, which has happened on average over the last 15 years by about 60,000, then everything else would make sense. But right now we're puzzled about the BLS numbers and looking forward for new leadership there to make it so that the numbers are more reliable.
And again, we're building, they've started building all of these factories and plants, including car factories. Car factories are coming back. We lost more than 50% of our car production over the years. And I think we're going to get all of it back. It's coming back in really rapidly. Really, we're building a lot of car plants. Indiana, places that you don't think of it so much, are taken, but also Detroit, lots of places it's coming in where I think we're going to get everything. We've lost it over a period of 40 years, and I think we're going to get it all back in a very short period of time. And big ones, big plants, incredible plants that were never going to come back. Without the tariffs, they wouldn't have come back. And I think without the election on November 5th, they wouldn't come back either. The election was very important also. Yeah, please.
President Donald Trump and the National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett meeting with reporters in the White House Oval Office. The House and Senate are not in session today. Congressman James Clyburn, Democrat of South Carolina, posting On top of rising prices caused by Trump's tariffs, more Americans can't even find work. 1 in 4 Americans are skipping meals to pay bills. Credit card debt is on the rise. Families are being crushed. Trump said his tariffs would bring jobs back to America. Where are they? And the Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, Democrat from New York, posting on X an Axios article with the headline, "Hiring Craters in Latest Economic Setback for Trump." Senator Schumer writing, Donald Trump's chaotic tariffs, failed policies, and fake trade deals have strangled job growth and continually raised prices on American families. The pressure is pushing working families closer to the breaking point. Senate Democrats will force votes to reverse Donald Trump's damaging tariffs. That post from Senator Schumer. And Wall Street reaction to the Labor Department jobs report. The Dow down 220, NASDAQ down 7, S&P down 20. In Washington, D.C., outside the Labor Department, the Stop DOL Cuts Coalition held a rally protesting Trump administration's cuts to the Labor Department workforce and proposed changes to labor and wage regulations. Wendy Chen Hoon is former director of the Labor Department's Women's Bureau, now president and executive director of the Center for Law and Social Policy.
We rely, all of us, on the jobs day numbers as a proxy for our nation's economic health. Because what lies at the heart of our economy? People. Workers keep our economy and our country running. And importantly, BLS tracks women's labor force participation. Under Trump, we have seen way too many downward trends, particularly for mothers' employment, for Black women's employment. In fact, the share of working mothers in the labor market has fallen every single month this year. Under Trump, Black women's unemployment rate has risen to its highest level in 4 years. While he purports to put American workers first, every single action that President Trump and this Secretary of Labor have taken are putting American workers dead last, undercutting the strength of our economy by undercutting working people. The Women's Bureau for the past century has operated under a congressional mandate to advocate for the needs of working women, to protect working women. We are mothers, we are daughters, we're sisters, we're spouses, and our earnings feed our families and they fuel our communities. There are 78 million working women in America's workforce today, and yet the Trump administration's Department of Labor has zeroed out the Women's Bureau, calling it a relic of the past and no longer necessary. Boo. They have eviscerated the staff who serve as the eyes and ears for the federal government for working women across our country. They have gutted several agencies that protect women in the workforce, at home and abroad, trying to cancel the Office of Federal Contract Compliance, OFCCP, the Bureau of International Labor Affairs, ILAB. Our colleague Thea used to run ILAB. While Trump's Department of Labor touts its goal to recruit 1 million new apprentices, they have canceled Women's Bureau's grants specifically designed to support employers who are dying to recruit, train, retain women who need access to the good jobs that they need filled.
Wendy Chen Hoon, former director of the Labor Department Women's Bureau, now executive director of the Center for Law and Social Policy, at today's rally outside the Labor Department in Washington. It was organized by the Stop DOL Cuts Coalition. There's an article at Federal News Network that reads, just 3 federal agencies, when combined, make up more than half of the total federal workforce reductions that have occurred so far under the Trump administration. Departments of Defense, Treasury, and Agriculture have cut their staffing levels this year by a cumulative total of about 106,000 employees, according to data compiled by the nonprofit Partnership for Public Service. That's out of an estimated 199 federal employees government-wide who have left their jobs since January, either voluntarily or by force. That was from Federal News Network. U.S. Senator Elissa Slotkin, Democrat of Michigan, spoke today at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City to call on the U.S. government to, according to her press release, prioritize our national security infrastructure around middle-class economics. The moderator of the event, Nick Schifrin, PBS NewsHour Foreign Affairs and Defense correspondent, asked her how her approach is different from President Trump's.
from the very beginning, President Trump's foreign policy approach has been intertwined with talk of the middle class, and his foreign policy tools have overlapped with what we have historically thought of as economic tools. And this isn't just about tariffs. In 2016, he and Bernie Sanders both emphasized early on how the Trans-Pacific Partnership and other free trade deals were hitting the middle class. That pushed Hillary Clinton, that pushed Obama against the TPP. So how does your frame differ from what has been a key aspect of his foreign policy approach for 9 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the president is a populist. And I think, my experience with Trump is that he's usually got the wrong answer for the right question, right? That he's picking up on something that's very real in the country, right? This issue with the struggling middle class. But then his answer on what to do about that, I very frequently disagree with, maybe not always. And certainly the sloppiness with which he conducts his economic policy making. Again, people in this room may know better than me. There is some real basic problems with the economic sense that it's making it. And as a representative who very much, I won the tightest Senate race in the country. I won by 19,000 votes out of 5.6 million voters. It was tight, okay? It was a cost of living election, period. And voters voted for whoever they thought was going to put more money in their pockets. He successfully won that campaign because he said he was going to lower costs. And I challenge anyone to tell me what part of your budget has gone down and not gone, in some cases, up precipitously. And this fall, with everyone, including probably everyone in this room, getting notification that their private health insurance is going up by 10 to 15% starting January 1, he is not, whatever he claims to care about, the results do not match what he says he gives a crap about.
Senator Elissa Slotkin, Democrat from Michigan, at the Council on Foreign Relations in New York City. You can find the video of the event in its entirety at our video library at cspan.org. This is Washington Today. Washington Post writes, the conservative group behind the Project 2025 governing playbook for President Donald Trump's second term is set to propose sweeping revisions to U.S. economic policy meant to encourage married heterosexual couples to have more children. The Heritage Foundation, a right-wing think tank headquartered a stone's throw from the U.S. Capitol, wants lawmakers to create new government-seeded savings accounts for married people only. The ideas are part of a 5-page executive summary of a forthcoming Heritage position paper titled, We Must Save the American Family. And joining us now to talk about it is Jay Zigmont, CEO of Childfree Trust, also an author and podcast host. Thanks for being with us. The Washington Post says it got this summary from Heritage. What do you make of it?
It's really not that surprising. I mean, it's what we saw in Project 2025, and we're seeing it being enacted in different ways. I actually live in Tennessee, and in Tennessee, they passed a law recently that in all schools you must teach the success sequence, which means you have to go to school, get married, and have kids. These are things we're seeing in law. And DOT in the recent guidelines said, hey, they're going to give transportation money preferentially to states that have higher than average fertility and marriage rates. It's something that, it's just a report that's coming out now for what's being enacted already.
Heritage is coming from the perspective that U.S. policy is not geared enough towards supporting families and children. What is the extent now?
I think the hard part is, I work with the 25% of the U.S. that are child-free or permanently childless. And the way we look at it is there are what we call pro-natalist policies that say you should have kids. And we think there should be support for people to have kids. But what we challenge is you shouldn't be encouraging or forcing people to have kids. You should just be supporting the people who have them. That's things like the child tax credit. There's things like daycare assistance programs and maternity and paternity leave. Those are important, but it's not necessarily one of those places for the government to say, yes, and then here is the way your family has to be structured and who has to be there for you to have a family. We have a family. It just doesn't involve kids.
Do we know what the public support would be for these type of policy changes advocated by Heritage?
It splits down political lines. Let's just be transparent on that. Especially as you look at the religious organizations, there is strong support for policies like this in both law and practice.
Another line from the Washington Post article that Heritage hopes to steer funding for childcare away from programs like Head Start and toward individual families, specifically to encourage parents to stay home and rear children. If stuff like that were to happen, how big of a change would it be to the U.S. government and the U.S. economy?
I think we're talking about the role in the House, and unfortunately, as you look at those reports, it really goes back to gender norms and this picture that, hey, there are people that should stay at home, and they haven't said it out loud, but it's usually what they're saying the woman should. And the hard part is women have changed their career, their path, their life into a different direction. It's not necessarily better or worse, but you're seeing this. If that actually happens, you're talking about, all right, what do we do with a workforce that is trained to do things that are now doing things? And if that's what they want to do, they want to stay at home and take care of the kids, that's great. But it's a question of should they be forced or encouraged to do it.
We're talking with Jay Zigmont, the CEO of Childfree Trust. Another part of this is the Heritage Foundation is advocating that the U.S. population grow, that people have more children. What's happening now in the U.S., and again, what would the change mean?
Yeah, I'm actually doing a TEDx talk on this next week. And if you look at the U.S. population, our fertility rate is about 1.6, which is well below the 2.1 needed to sustain the population. And they're arguing that's a problem. What I'm arguing is it's an issue, but it may not be a problem. There are solutions. So, if you want the population of the U.S. to grow, you have two options. You can either encourage people to have kids, or you can embrace immigration. Neither of those are politically advantageous at this point, depending on which side you look at. So one of the arguments is that we need the population to grow to sustain Social Security, and they're trying to say that's the reason we should do it. But that ignores the systemic problems in the design of Social Security.
And what are those problems?
The problem is Social Security is designed that you have to have a younger workforce constantly coming in to pay for the older workforce. And it's not sustainable because if you always have to embrace growth, you're eventually building a system that has to kind of eat itself. We're not doing sustainable growth, and we're not creating an economy and environment that can handle it. We've already got more people in the world than we have resources. And if you only answer is more growth, it's not necessarily a positive outcome.
And finally, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what is Childfree Trust?
Childfree Trust, we're solving the problem for child-free people of who makes decisions for you when you can't. Part of the system is everything assumes you have kids. So like the question of who makes decisions for you, your power of attorney, executor, or trustee, it's a hard one because the system assumes you must have kids, and that's not true for the 25% of the U.S. who don't.
Jay Zigmont is the CEO. Thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
A story from The Hill. Rising power prices are becoming a political liability for Republicans as electricity costs outpace inflation. A recent Consumer Price Index report found electricity prices were rising at double the rate of inflation, having increased 5.5% over the past year, and the general public may be starting to take notice. Mark Wolf, executive director of the National Energy Assistance Directors Association, said in the last couple of years, different items that have gone up in price have become media concerns. They become very visible. People get very angry, and I think electric rates are heading in that direction. The Trump administration is already seeing it as one and trying to put the blame on Democrats and renewable energy. Energy Secretary Chris Wright told Fox Business Network's Mornings with Maria, when asked about utility bills this week, that is a key challenge for us. That was all from the article at The Hill. Secretary Wright spoke today at the Council on Foreign Relations in D.C., getting a lot of questions about why Trump administration has cut back support for renewable energy.
I'm Barbara Slavin from the Stimson Center, and my question is about batteries. You talked about wind and solar and how you can't use the energy if the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. There are batteries now which can solve that problem. Are you investing in massive batteries that can provide cheap energy, that are built in this country, and that can use all sorts of energy, including solar and wind, very, very productively?
So short answer is yes. We have multiple projects we're supporting for both supply chain for batteries in the U.S. and maybe most importantly for a new battery technology that can store long duration energy at a lower cost. But yes, we are all about that. Definitely energy storage is a plus. But again, I'm about the numbers. If you take all the batteries in the United States, including all the batteries in the electric cars, you can store our electric grid energy production for 5 minutes. So when you get a cold front, like when 200 people died for the storm Uri in Texas, that was 3 or 4 days of massively elevated demand. So the road from 5 minutes to 72 hours to 100 hours is a very long road. So that we need more affordable energy storage. Today, the cost of energy storage makes firming or making wind and solar firm, meaning 24 hours a day, increases their cost 5 to 15-fold. So we don't have a practical way to firm wind and solar today, but it would be awesome if we did.
Energy Secretary Chris Wright at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, D.C. today. Story from 7 News in Washington. U.S. Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia, and U.S. Congressman Don Beyer, Democrat of Virginia, held a roundtable with local and national aviation experts Friday to discuss aviation safety and safety at Reagan National Airport following January's deadly mid-air collision. Former pilots and air traffic controllers were among those invited to speak, as well as leadership from the Metropolitan Washington Airports Authority. Matthew Collins, whose brother Christopher was one of 67 people killed when an Army Black Hawk helicopter collided with American Airlines plane, spoke on behalf of the victims. Roundtable members discussed the crowded air traffic in the Metro Washington area and technological standards that could be put in place to help prevent future crashes. That was from 7 News. The event was in Alexandria, Virginia. Here is Senator Warner.
One of the things that kind of struck me, this was a great stat out of the first preliminary report. Between October 21 and December of 24, there were 15,214 near midair incidents between planes and helicopters at DCA. Jack, had you heard that number? Is that?
Yes, but they were in close proximity.
Yeah, but again, how many of you have had a landing at DCA where you're not really aware you're a passenger, but you've had the planes coming in for a landing, you divert and you have to come back around. You know, again, there are such unique components to this airport that we have to grapple with. And you know, and I am not the expert that I used to be on Commerce Committee, and I remember in 2009 I got here and at the Senate, and they said, you know, Senator, we're going to get airport modernization, air traffic control modernization done. We're going to move from the radar to GPS by 2015 or 2018. And I do want to get more on that, but this issue for the non-technical people, and I will try to do it in the simplest way. The ADS-B, Tom, what we were talking about, is to making sure that there is that signal that goes out from the plane that will let everybody else know. You know, in the night of the tragedy, as you know, the military helicopter didn't have their ADS-B on, so they have had an exemption. So the legislation that and I think our bill is better than the crude bill, but it's kind of all. You know, there's 3 buckets, you know, shared airspace, how do we deal with this, ADS-B, in continued use, really focusing on busy airports, which clearly we fall into, independent review, risk assessments, so that's air traffic safety, the FAA staffing, and air traffic controller pipeline.
Senator Mark Warner, Democrat from Virginia, at a roundtable discussion in Alexandria, Virginia, that included Congressman Don Beyer, Democrat of Virginia, current and former air traffic controllers, pilots, aviation stakeholders, and a relative of a person who was killed in the mid-air collision near Reagan Airport between a helicopter and a plane earlier this year. New York Times, writing, the Trump administration said it will drop a Biden-era plan to require airlines to compensate passengers and cover their expenses for lengthy delays or cancellations caused by carriers, a setback for aviation consumer protections. The proposed federal rule, which the Biden administration announced in 2023, would guarantee passengers $200 to $775 in compensation, as well as free meals, lodging, and rebookings in cases where U.S. flight disruptions were caused by circumstances under airlines' control, such as a mechanical issue or a system outage. That was from the New York Times. Washington Today continues in a moment.
past president. Why are you doing this? This is outrageous.
This is a kangaroo court.
This fall, C-SPAN presents a rare moment of unity, Ceasefire, where the shouting stops and the conversation begins. Join Political Playbook Chief Correspondent and White House Bureau Chief Dasha Burns as host of Ceasefire, bringing two leaders from opposite sides of the aisle into a dialogue to find common ground. Ceasefire, this fall on the network that doesn't take sides, only on C-SPAN.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. Story from The Hill. Republicans in Congress unveiled legislation Friday that would bolster the Trump administration's push to rebrand the Department of Defense as the Department of War, a moniker the U.S. military apparatus held until its overhaul in the 1940s. President Trump, who has floated the idea in recent weeks, is expected to issue an executive order Friday that will technically change the name, but an official switch requires approval from Congress. Senators Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, and Mike Lee, Republican of Utah, are leading the renaming legislation on the Senate side, with Congressman Greg Steube, Republican of Florida, taking the lead in the House, according to a joint news release from the three lawmakers. That was from The Hill. President Trump did sign the executive order and was joined by the Secretary, Pete Hegseth, in the Oval Office.
We've been talking about this Department of War. So we won the First World War, we won the Second World War, we won everything before that and in between, and then we decided to go woke and we changed the name to Department of Defense. So we're going Department of War, and I'd like to ask our Secretary of War to say a few words. Pete Hegseth, I think it's a much more appropriate name, especially in light of where the world is right now. We have the strongest military in the world. We have the greatest equipment in the world. We have the greatest manufacturers of equipment by far. There's nobody to even compete. And you see that with this and so many other things. The Patriots are the best. Every element of the military, we make the best by far. So, Pete, I'd like to ask you and maybe Dan Raisin-Cane to say a few words, please.
Mr. President, thank you. After winning a war for independence in 1789, George Washington established the War Department, and Henry Knox was his first Secretary of War. And this country won every major war after that, to include World War I and World War II. Total victory, Mr. President, as you said. Then 150 years after that, we changed the name after World War II from the Department of War to the Department of Defense in 1947. And as you pointed out, Mr. President, we haven't won a major war since, and that's not to disparage our warfighters, whether it's the Korean War, or the Vietnam War, or our generation of Iraq and Afghanistan. That's to recognize that this name change is not just about renaming, it's about restoring. Words matter. It's restoring, as you've guided us to, Mr. President, restoring the warrior ethos.
Secretary Pete Hegseth with President Donald Trump in the White House Oval Office as he signed that executive order. By the way, the executive orders signed today put him over 200 executive orders since he took office in January. And Secretary Hegseth's name plaques at the Pentagon changed today to Secretary of War. Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky, writing on X, if we call it the Department of War, we better equip the military to actually prevent and win wars. Can't preserve American primacy if we're unwilling to spend substantially more on our military than Carter or Biden. Peace through strength requires investment, not just rebranding. That was from Senator Mitch McConnell. Senator Jeanine Shaheen, Democrat from New Hampshire, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee, was on MSNBC this morning.
I also want to ask you about President Trump's push to rename the Defense Department to the Department of War. Politico reports it could cost billions just to change every plaque, piece of signage, not just in the U.S., but also bases around the world. I wonder if you have concerns about that, or also about the impact that the name change could have on perceptions of America around the world.
I have real concerns about the impact of this kind of an effort on the readiness of our men and women in the military. I sit on the Armed Services Committee in the Senate, and we are struggling for resources and dealing with conflicts around the world that we haven't seen in my lifetime. It is a very dangerous environment. And for the President and the Secretary of Defense to spend time and energy is a distraction from what we need to do to focus on the readiness of our troops who are serving. And it's nothing more than an effort to distract from other issues that are going on in the country, as far as I'm concerned.
Senator Jeanine Pirro, Democrat from New Hampshire, ranking member on the Foreign Relations Committee on MSNBC this morning. The executive order signed by President Trump designates Department of War as an official alternative title for the Department of Defense and authorizes the Secretary, Pete Hegseth, to use Secretary of War in formal communications. The president was asked whether he believes that Congress will make this official and pass a law. He said he does not know, but he also said it's uncertain whether Congress has to pass the law. Also, if you go to defense.gov, which used to be the website, Department of Defense, it redirects you to war.gov. Story from NBC4 in Washington. 2 17-year-olds have been charged as adults in the deadly shooting of 21-year-old congressional intern Eric Terminian Giacom in June, authorities said Friday. A third person remains sought by police. U.S. Attorney for DC Jeanine Pirro said the suspects were in a stolen car when they opened fire, and Terminian Giacom was shot 4 times. Terminian Giacom was in D.C. for the summer for an internship in Republican Congressman Ron Estes' office. He's from Kansas. That was from NBC4 in D.C. Here is U.S. Attorney for D.C. Jeanine Pirro at today's news conference.
Right now, 2 individuals have been arrested, and this is a critical step toward justice. But our work is not done as we continue to seek a third suspect in this case. Charges have been filed against 2 individuals, a 17-year-old juvenile by the name of Jalen Lucas. He is a juvenile, now charged in adult court. Another 17 years old, Kelvin Thomas Jr., another juvenile being charged in adult court, both of them charged with murder while armed under the DC Code 22-2101, which is murder in the first degree. Now, these juveniles have prior violent juvenile records in the family court. This is why, from day one, when I came here, I knew that we were missing a whole segment of criminals in D.C., in our nation's capital, because the D.C. Council thinks that these kids need to be protected. They don't need to be protected. They need to be made accountable, and we need to be protected. I am advocating and have advocated for jurisdiction over juveniles 14, 15, 16, and 17. They need to be brought into the criminal court so that we can prosecute them. Because if we do, we can prevent the murder that happened here, based upon the histories of these 2 and the third individual that I cannot talk about. Eric didn't deserve to be gunned down, and the system failed him. The system that felt that juveniles needed to be coddled. And it's bad enough to be gunned down on any street, but to be gunned down in our nation's capital is an outrage. This killing underscores why we need the authority to prosecute these younger kids, because they're not kids, they're criminals. They're violent criminals. We have to hold them accountable. We have to prevent them from robbing the innocents of their lives.
U.S. Attorney for Washington, D.C. Jeanine Pirro at a news conference today. Also there, the mayor and police chief of Washington, D.C. More from the NBC4 article. Eric Terminian Giacom was one of 3 people shot on June 30th just outside the Mount Vernon Square metro station when 2 people in masks got out of an Acura SUV and opened fire on 2 teenage boys on bikes. A woman and a 16-year-old also were shot and were recovering. Washington Post writes that leaders in the U.S. House and Senate are not planning to hold votes to extend President Donald Trump's temporary control of D.C. police before it expires next week, according to 3 people familiar with the matter. The news arrives on the heels of D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser ordering indefinite coordination between local and federal law enforcement officials and projecting confidence in the city's ability to handle public safety without federal intervention. That was from the Washington Post. And this is Washington Today. Story from Axios. President Donald Trump on Friday dismissed demands for additional Jeffrey Epstein files as a Democratic hoax, despite members of his own party demanding more transparency from the administration. The House Oversight Committee released 33,000 pages of Epstein documents this week, but Trump's handling of the scandal has driven a wedge between the president and his MAGA coalition. The president said on Truth Social, the Department of Justice has done its job. They have given everything requested of them. It's time to end the Democrat Epstein hoax and give the Republicans credit for the great, even legendary job that they are doing. Epstein survivors have repeatedly said their push for additional documents is not politically motivated, and the congressional push to release additional documents is led by multiple Republicans. That was from Axios. Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Democrat from New Jersey, posted a short video today urging a Republican congressman from New Jersey to sign a discharge petition to allow a House vote to release all the Epstein documents.
Good morning and happy birthday, Tom Kane. I'm so delighted you have a birthday to enjoy. I am sending you a little present. Here it is. It is a pen. Now you can use this pen as your birthday gift and sign on to the Epstein discharge petition. Take care. God bless.
Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, Democrat from New Jersey, in that video directed at Tom Kean, Republican from New Jersey. The Hill reporter Emily Brooks writing on X, the Thomas Massie discharge petition on Epstein disclosure bill is on path to 218 signature success as soon as this month, even if no more Republicans sign on. 215 signatures now. Last Democrat, Eric Swalwell, will sign on. He was out this week due to a death in the family. That's 216. And 2 Democrats incoming in special elections on September 9th and September 23rd confirmed they will sign it. That'll be 218. Unless, then she lists 3 Republicans, Lauren Boebert, Nancy Mace, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, removed their names. That post from Emily Brooks from The Hill. House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican of Louisiana, argued against the Epstein files discharge petition on a Punchbowl News podcast posted Thursday.
4 Republicans have signed to the discharge petition demanding the release of the Epstein files. Yes or no? Can you stop that?
Well, it should be stopped because it's superfluous now. It's not necessary. The developments over August, as we knew would happen, have made that effectively a moot point. The vote last night was very important because we've endorsed the Oversight Committee. This is a truly and totally bipartisan effort to dig into the facts and release all the documents to the American public. But it's got to be done in a responsible manner. My problem with the discharge petition is that it does not do that. It does not adequately protect the innocent victim.
Tom Massie doesn't agree with you on that.
Tom Massie, I would love if he were sitting here right now. He did not debate me in conference yesterday because he has no facts in his side.
He did debate you, but he didn't have maybe you didn't.
No, he didn't debate me. He stood up for 1 minute and said, I disagree, but he had no facts, okay? I'm a lawyer. This is what I do. I used to litigate these cases. They have haphazardly drawn up the discharge petition. It does not adequately protect the innocent victims. And while we had a number of women bravely, heroically stand in front of the cameras and tell their stories, there are as many as potentially 1,000 victims of these Epstein evils. I mean, unthinkable, unspeakable crimes committed on these women. They do not want their names and identities known. And it's not just the unmasking that would be allowed. It doesn't even affirm or require DOJ and its personnel to cover those folks. So we have to do that. The other thing is, too, child sexual abuse materials. It's called CSAM. It's a legal term of art. In the discharge petition, they point to the wrong U.S. Code article, which does not include the definition, which means they don't protect against that. So you could potentially have child porn, photos of young women. Some of these women were recruited and groomed at age 13 or 14. We cannot go down that road. It does not protect whistleblowers and confidential informants, undercover law enforcement agents involved in the sex trafficking investigation. The discharge petition doesn't cover that. That is a dangerous prospect. You have to have those people to have a sex trafficking investigation. So what the Oversight Committee is doing, request everything the discharge petition wants and more, because they also went after the Epstein estate, which is not even encompassed in discharge, and that's a big treasure trove of info, the Treasury Department's records, the bank records, all that. So this is the right way to go. You have bulldogs on both sides of the aisle in that room. I sat with them for 2.5 hours and listened to those victims' gut-wrenching testimony as it was. They're all dialed in, and you've heard them. They're motivated. So the truth is coming out, and that's what should happen.
House Speaker Mike Johnson, Republican from Louisiana, in a Punchbowl News podcast on Thursday. New York Times writes today, close advisors have been crafting a plan for President Trump to nominate Mayor Eric Adams to be ambassador to Saudi Arabia in an effort to end the mayor's long-shot campaign for re-election in New York City, according to 4 people familiar with discussions. Again, that was from the New York Times, and that follows reports earlier this week the Trump administration had offered jobs to Mayor Adams and Republican candidate for mayor of New York City, Curtis Sliwa, to get them out of the race and make it a one-on-one matchup with Andrew Cuomo, independent, and Democratic nominee Zohran Mamdani, all with the intent of defeating Mamdani, who's currently in the lead in the polls. Today, Mayor Adams said he is not getting out.
There has been so much speculation, communications, announcements of what I'm doing, no matter what I've stated over and over again publicly. So I want to be clear with you. Andrew Cuomo is a snake and a liar. I am in this race, and I'm the only one that can beat Mamdani. Andrew has had a career of pushing black candidates out of races. You've heard me say it over again. Carl McCall, Charlie King, David Patterson. This is his career that must stop with me. This city can't go backwards, New Yorkers. This is a city that I inherited, where crime was out of control, COVID, no one wanted to be on our subway system. We watched what happened in housing. The reason people are having these conversations is because I made this city safe. I committed myself and dedicated myself to a city that I love. And I'm going to continue to do that.
New York City Mayor Eric Adams running for re-election as an independent, making a statement today in New York City at the White House and the Oval Office. President Donald Trump, and there were reports earlier this week that people in his administration had offered Mayor Adams jobs to drop out of the race. President Trump getting questioned about it.
Mayor Adams of New York has announced that he's staying in the mayoral race there. Can you react to that, but also tell us?
No, I mean, he has to do what he wants. I mean, he's free to do what he wants. It would seem to me, and everybody in this room, including you, that the only way you're going to beat the communists, because you have a communist running, which is fine. I'll have to deal with a communist in New York City. I never thought that was going to happen. This is something I didn't think was going to happen, Scott. You're going to have to explain this one, because we're going to have a communist mayor. It would seem to me that if he stays in, if you have more than one candidate running against him, it can't be one. If you have one candidate, if he's the right candidate, I would say that Cuomo might have a chance of winning if it was a one-on-one. If it's not one-on-one, it's going to be a hard race. And we'll get used to a communist, and he's going to have to go through the White House and get approvals for everything. And we're going to make sure that New York is not hurt. We want to make sure that New York is cherished and taken care of. And so I didn't know he was running or not running.
But you didn't offer him an ambassador?
No, I didn't do that. No, I wouldn't do that. It's nothing wrong with doing it, but I didn't do that.
President Donald Trump answering reporters' questions today in the White House Oval Office. New York Times writing, recent polls have shown that Zohran Mamdani, the Democratic nominee, holds a lead in the general election for mayor of New York City, though his support is less than half of the electorate in most surveys. 3 candidates are trying to catch him, Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Eric Adams, who are both running as independents, and Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate. Polls have also found that most New Yorkers are unsatisfied with the direction of the city and have an unfavorable view of Adams. That was from the New York Times. From Associated Press, United Kingdom Prime Minister Keir Starmer shook up his cabinet Friday after his top deputy stepped down over a tax error on a home purchase, leaving a big hole in the center-left Labour government. That was from AP. Prime Minister Starmer responding to Deputy Prime Minister Angela Rayner's resignation letter by writing, "We acted in accordance with the strengthened system relating to ministerial conduct that we put in place on coming into government. You are right to refer yourself to the independent advisor on ministerial standards and right to act on his conclusions. Although I believe you have reached the right decision, it is a decision which I know is very painful for you. You have given your all to making the Labour government a success, and you have been a central part of our plan to make Britain fairer for working families. Part of the response letter from Prime Minister Keir Starmer. Opposition leader in Great Britain, Kemi Badenoch of the Conservative Party, posted a video.
Angela Rayner is finally gone. It says everything about Keir Starmer's weak leadership that he had to wait for a report before acting. The truth is simple. She dodged tax. She lied about it. Her position was untenable for days. Keir Starmer once promised honesty and integrity in politics, but when faced with this test, he hesitated. No principles, no backbone. We Conservatives forced this investigation and were vindicated. But this isn't the end. Questions remain. What did Keir Starmer know and when? Did he mislead the public? He has now lost a deputy prime minister after losing a transport secretary, an anti-corruption minister, and a homelessness minister to scandal. His government is in crisis, and all of this is a distraction from the profound economic crisis the country is facing because of his decisions. While Labour hiked taxes on ordinary families, their own ministers dodge paying tax themselves. One rule for them, another for everyone else. The country deserves better. Only the Conservatives under my leadership will deliver that.
The Conservative Party leader in Great Britain, Kemi Badenoch, currently in opposition, posting that video. More from the Associated Press article. Prime Minister Starmer carried out a major reshuffle, a forced government reboot after a rocky 14 months in office that has seen his popularity plunge. Foreign Secretary David Lammy was moved to replace Angela Rayner as Deputy Prime Minister and also took the Justice portfolio. Yvette Cooper moved from the Home Office to become Foreign Secretary, while the Justice Secretary, Shabana Mahmood, became Home Secretary. Treasury Chief Rachel Reeves was kept in post, meaning that the three major offices of state below the Prime Minister will be occupied by women for the first time in history. That was from Associated Press. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Before we go, we're pleased to share some C-SPAN news. Beginning this fall, all three C-SPAN networks will be available on YouTube TV and Hulu Plus Live TV. C-SPAN's availability on these streaming platforms expands access to our network's trusted, unfiltered coverage of U.S. government. We'll keep you updated on the launch date soon. And thank you for watching and listening wherever you follow C-SPAN. Have a good night and weekend.